Okoa Uchumi Statement, Kenya istahili heshima. How dare you, the government leaders that we employed, propose more debt and taxes while we lose most of our past revenue? 4 in every 10 Kenyans are poor, and many more will fall into poverty unless drastic action is taken to spend public resources in what matters and to spend prudently. Their aspiration to live a dignified life are dashed at every turn, with public services continuing to decline, especially in agriculture, education, health, and which are the most critical and enabling sectors. It is against this background that we, the Okoa Uchumi Campaign, a coalition of civil society organizations advocating for prudent public finance management, submitted our recommendation on the 2025 budget policy statement and the medium-term debt strategy to the National Treasury and subsequently to the National Assembly and the Senate. We reiterate the message that we delivered to the government in this particular press briefing. These submissions highlighted key concerns concerning the Kenya's growing public debt, fiscal deficit, and lack of transparency in budget formulation. Kenya's fiscal position remains extremely risky, with the fiscal deficit for the coming year, 2025 to 2026, projected at a humongous 831 billion, which is said to be 4.3% of the GDP as per the Budget Policy Statement 2025. However, our computation indicates that that deficit could be as high as 5.1. This is due to the fact that the government revenue projections are overly optimistic, as they have always been, increasing the risk of additional borrowing to cover shortfalls. This poses a serious threat to the economic stability and increases the tax burden on already struggling Kenyan citizens and business, and puts our economic recovery at risk. Conversely, and especially this week, the coalition expresses profound concerns over the recent revelations contained in the Auditor General's report and the subsequent report of potential executive interference with the Office of the Auditor General. The findings of the Auditor General's report, released on March 4th, exposed critical deficiencies in the implementation of the Social Health Insurance Fund and the Social Health Authority, SHE and SHA initiatives, and the Hustler Funds, among others. These revelations necessitate urgent and decisive action. We also demand immediate transparency and accountability from Parliament by acting on the findings of the report and sanctioning all ministries, departments, and agencies that are adversely mentioned. We want to point here that the business of Parliament is not to defend government, is to defend we, the taxpayers, who are their ultimate employers. We are deeply concerned that at a time when the Auditor General's office is acting independently and executing the mandate of the office as per the Constitution in bringing to the fore deeply needed scrutiny for all our public finances and various initiatives introduced across various sectors, they are met by attacks by Parliament and even some proposals that we have seen that may affect the independence that is already guaranteed in the Constitution, which we all voted for when the referendum was conducted in 2010. The Auditor General and the Controller of Budget are answerable to the people of Kenya through elected representatives in Parliament, and Parliament must therefore step up its role and take the needed actions to improve fiscal management. It is against this background that we reiterate that our problem in Kenya has never been about revenue, it is about expenditure, which includes budgeted and legislated corruption. We would like to bring to your attention the following areas of concern that we have discovered in the budget policy statement and the medium-term debt strategy 2025. I'll ask my colleagues to come and delve deeper into each of the issues.
So I'll proceed from where my colleague has left, just building on the nexus between fiscal deficit and public debt. The national debt to GDP ratio is projected to exceed sustainable levels, reaching 63.6% against a debt anchor of 55%. The budget policy statement for 2025 projects a fiscal deficit of 831 billion Kenya shillings, with 684.2 billion Kenya shillings in domestic borrowing and 146.8 billion Kenya shillings in foreign borrowing. According to the budget policy statement for 2025, the government's increased reliance on domestic borrowing shall be at 82.3% of total borrowing, which poses a further risk of crowding out private sector investment, raising interest rate, and stifling economic growth. This situation encourages banks to prefer investing in government securities, rather facilitating employment creation by lending to private enterprises. We wonder why bank interests are now coming down. Who really benefits from the exorbitantly high interest rates charged by our banks? Domestic borrowing through treasury bills and bonds are currently incurring high interest rates, typically above 8.94%, compared to concessional external loans, which range from 2 to 3%. Domestic loans often have shorter repayment periods of about 1 to 10 years, leading to higher repayment pressure. Additionally, this debt is mainly used for budget support, and senior government officials have admitted that up to 30% of the budget might be lost to corruption. This suggests that domestic borrowing could be indirectly funding corruption activities. We note with concern that the microeconomic numbers presented in the MTDS, that is the medium-term debt strategy, and the budget policy statement are inconsistent. Case in point is the conflicting expenditure numbers in the budget policy statement that have a variance of Kenya shillings 73 billion. Further, the nominal GDP reported in the microeconomic forecast of the budget policy statement and the fiscal framework in the same document are different. We note that an inflated nominal GDP has been used to compare the fiscal deficit. This leaves us wondering what the government is hiding from Kenyans. The projected ordinary revenue of 2.83 trillion Kenya shillings is overly ambitious, considering past revenue underperformance and slowing economic growth. This therefore means that the government is either planning to introduce additional taxation measures in the forthcoming finance bill of 2025 or borrowing. We are opposed to either of the above options, and our view is that the government should have realistic revenue projections and cut its expenditures to match the available resources. It is time for this administration to live within its means. Punda amechoka, and the owner has refused to address the leaking roof and fissure that risk crippling livelihoods, and has already adversely invested local businesses in the agriculture, manufacturing sectors, communication, and housing sectors. Employers and employees have expressed the fact that payslips cannot take any further burden of tax, and neither can bank accounts and home budgets shoulder any further taxes in VAT or other indirect taxes. We must fix the source of misappropriation and corruption immediately.
On the same, we note the removal of key recommendations from the midterm debt strategy 2025 document tabled in Parliament, such as the independence of Public Debt Management Office and monitoring of debt by the state-owned enterprises raises concerns about transparency and accountability. The government must publish debt agreements and provide a clear roadmap for reducing Kenya's debt burden through fiscal discipline and strategic borrowing. We note that allocations to agriculture, rural and urban development sector are declining from 3.2% to 3% as a ratio of total national expenditure. This is concerning because the percentage falls below the Maputo Declaration of 10% signed by African heads of state. According to the Economic Survey 2024, the sector contributed to 21% of the GDP in 2023. Conversely, based on the Abuja Declaration of 2001 that set health sector allocation at a minimum of 15% of the total annual budget is not met in the BPS 2025 projections. Despite forecasting an increase from 5.2% in the financial year 2024-2025 to 8% in the financial year 2025-2026 to health sector, this still falls below Abuja Declaration. The increases observed remain insignificant compared to the underlying responsibilities, implying the need for more allocation. SHI irregularities. The report highlights by the auditor that was highlighted by Diana, highlights significant breaches of constitutional procurement standards. Specifically, Article 227, 1, regarding the inconsistency in acquisition of SHA information technology digitization system. The absence of a comprehensive plan and midterm budget expenditure framework further underscores systemic failures. The exorbitant cost of the system, amounting to Kenya shillings 104.8 billion, coupled with unauthorization allocation of 2.5% of members' contributions to unknown people, raises serious concerns regarding fiscal prudence and public consent. The lack of government ownership and control over this data-sensitive system is unacceptable. Similarly, lack of scope in the process raises further questions on how the amount used in training healthcare and hospital staff was arrived at. The defensive approach adopted by the executive is malicious, since the challenges are bare and glaring. On the Hustler Fund, the audit confirms a 64% non-performing loan rate, representing Kenya shilling 8.7 billion in unserviced loans. Further, the discovery of underage beneficiaries in 1,186 loans, totaling to Kenya shilling 681,395 shillings, points to inadequate oversight and control. There are instances of double loans insured to different people on various occasions, thus costing the scheme and Kenyans billions. The interest rate of 8% prorated, which is not affordable as initially thought. The lack of transparency regarding accrued interest and the beneficiaries of the funds proceeds demands immediate clarification from the ministry and its accounting officers.
Forward with accountability, forward.
Forward.
Forward with accountability, forward.
Forward.
Demands and recommendations. Transparency and accountability. Parliament, through the Senate and National Assembly, must compel the executive to provide a comprehensive accounting of public resources allocated to SHA, NHIF, account for balances brought forward ahead of decisions to pay 10 million Kenya shillings and below owed to hospitals, and the Hustler Fund. The ownership and cost justification of the SHA technology system must be publicly disclosed, considering the established precedent set by the cancellation of the Adani deals due to procurement irregularities. We demand the immediate cessation of all SHA contracts. The President must declare SHA a national issue, given the risk to lives and the confirmed corruption. Independence of Parliament must uphold the independence of the Office of the Auditor General and Office of the Controller of Budget by ensuring timely implementation of audit recommendations, as mandated by the Constitution and the Public Finance Management Act. We condemn in the strongest terms the witnessed intimidation and intensified conversation around the Public Audit Amendment Bill 2024, proposing an audit advisory board aimed at limiting the powers and independence of the Auditor General. Such actions constitute a direct assault on constitutional integrity and accountability. We recognize the deliberate pattern as an attempt to capture and control these independent institutions, similar to what happened with the Kenya Anti-Corruption Commission, now known as the Ethics and Anti-Corruption Commission. The Auditor General and the Controller of Budget must be afforded the full protection and resources necessary to execute their mandate without intimidation or prejudice. We also recommend the establishment of an independent public debt management office without being perceived as a subordinate office within the Ministry of National Treasury and Economic Planning. Further, Parliament should amend Section 62 to make PDMO, Public Debt Management Office, a fully autonomous office. The County Public Accounts Committee must enforce a strict adherence to the March 31st deadline for responses to audit queries. We demand a robust framework for scrutinizing flagged irregularities and ensuring implementation of recommendations from all relevant parliamentary committees. Furthermore, mechanisms of monitoring and enforcing compliance by state agencies and counties must be established. The government should increase the funding of the agricultural, rural and urban development sector to meet the Maputo Declaration target of 10%, given its 21.8% contribution of GDP. Likewise, the health sector budget should reach at least 15% of total expenditure, as per the Abuja Declaration, to ensure adequate healthcare access. Funds should be reallocated from non-essential expenditures to these critical sectors, which are vital for economic stability and public well-being. Additionally, a transparent, needs-based budgeting approach is necessary to align allocations with national priorities and citizen needs. The deficit in the financial year 2025-2026 should be cut by 50% as proposed in the 2022 by the Budget and Appropriation Committee, which can be achieved by prioritizing essential projects and cutting unnecessary expenditures. The government should focus on critical infrastructure projects, healthcare, education, and agricultural initiatives that enhance food security and support rural development. Administrative costs can be reduced by streamlining operations and eliminating redundant positions, while luxury expenditure and unauthorized spending should be eliminated. There is need for a more balanced approach to revenue mobilization and focuses on enhancing tax compliance and efficiency rather than introducing new tax burden on citizens and businesses. Forward to accountability, forward.
Forward.
Thank you very much. My name is Wanja Maina. Tomorrow is International Women's Day, and this month is International Women's Month. Before I read my part, I wish to celebrate two women, Nancy Gathongo, who is the Auditor General, and Margaret Nyakango, who is the Controller of Budget, because so far they have proven to be our last line of defense as ordinary Kenyans. I will continue. The current budget prioritization needs to address debt vulnerabilities. It is concerning that in the financial year 2025 and 2026, over 67% of the consolidated fund services allocation is dedicated to debt servicing instead of development project. We urge the Parliament and the government to develop a strategy for managing and retiring domestic debt to reduce interest payment costs. It is essential for the government to limit its domestic borrowing, as excessive borrowing can crowd out the private sector by driving up interest. Additionally, we recommend that the government ease monetary policy by reducing interbank rates to single digits, which would promote increased lending to the private sector. The government needs to improve public participation in the budget-making process to ensure that citizens' opinions influence the final budget decisions. This increases transparency and accountability, promoting trust between the government and the citizens. It ensures the incorporation of a range of perspectives, contributing to a more balanced and equitable budget. It also empowers citizens by allocating them to have a say in how public funds are allocated, which promotes a sense of ownership and shared responsibility in the community. Resource allocation should prioritize agriculture, micro, small and medium enterprises, and social welfare to enhance economic resilience and inclusivity. Investing in agriculture improves food security, it creates jobs, it promotes rural development. Supporting MSMEs advances innovation and drives economic growth, while social welfare programs elevate the living standards of the people. It reduces inequality and strengthens social cohesion through healthcare, education, and safety nets. Parliament must scrutinize the discrepancies in the BPS and the MTDS and direct the National Treasury to provide accurate and consistent fiscal projections. The National Treasury should be mandated to revise its revenue and expenditure projections to align with the realistic economic conditions and avoid excessive borrowing. A forensic public debt audit should be expedited and its findings made public to enhance accountability in debt management. The Okoa campaign, do I read this bit? Okoa Uchumi Campaign reiterates its unwavering commitment to safeguarding public resources and upholding the principles of transparency and accountability. Fiscal discipline through expenditure rationalization, improving revenue collection, and engaging citizens in the budget-making process will ensure that resources are allocated efficiently and effectively. The Okoa Uchumi campaigns remains committed to advocating for responsible fiscal policies that promote economic sustainability, social equity, and good governance. We urge the government to prioritize the interests of Kenyans by taking immediate action to address concerns raised and to ensure that Kenyans' economic future is secured through prudent public finance management. In the meantime, we call on all Kenyans to remain engaged in the budget process and the priorities that Parliament will put forward, as well as the budget-raising measures, so that we can take charge. Thank you very much.
But just to note, the Independent Public Debt Management Office is something that was envisaged from the time that we were renegotiating the Constitution, and then particularly when Jubilee came into power and we realized our borrowing needed to be managed. Please remember, historically, all our major scandals, Anglo Leasing, Goldenberg, were debt-related scandals. So we have a history of stealing our debt. So that is part of why the discussion has been there. On the demands around the audit of public debt, you will remember Okoa Uchumi has continued to demand for a forensic and a performance audit. We were joined by the Gen Z, but unfortunately, our forensic audit was captured by the president, who attempted to set up a task force to audit debt. Now, how these things work and why we are saying Parliament must stop playing around and act like they understand who they are. Let me use the example of a principal of a school. When an audit is presented of the school, the person who is most responsible is the principal. But that audit, for it to be enforced, the people who provide oversight and oversee it is the board of management. In the case of Kenya, the president is a principal and the board is Parliament. So if we are to get an auditor, they can only be appointed by the BOM, never the principal. So that is what the president tried to do, even co-opted members of Okoa Uchumi, but it fell flat. And it has never taken off. We still want a forensic and performance audit that is driven by the Auditor General, supervised by Parliament. If they realize that they need other resources, this is very, very important. Have we been waiting? On the issues of audit of public debt, Okoa Uchumi has worked. Actually, Kenya Human Rights Commission and TISA, who are members of Okoa Uchumi, received a judgment in December last year where the government had 45 days to give us all the debt contracts since 2013. How they were used, the balances, how they were negotiated, everything. Right now, the Cabinet Secretary for Treasury is in contempt. It is only that we have not finalized processing the court order. We serve him with the court order and hold him in contempt. Because if the forensic audit is not happening, we are not sitting and waiting. We want it because in this room, in this country, tukishazieka kwa social media, na analysts will help us to know our true position. And you're aware somebody else has petitioned and has done an analysis where they say we have a lot of odious debt. We believe there is some debt that we have acquired and that has not been used according to the Constitution. But for us to get to that conclusion, we are waiting for government to honor this court order and we can start the People's Forensic Audit. Thank you. PDMO.
Office. We anticipate an office that is independent from the Cabinet Secretary for the Treasury, which advises the Cabinet Secretary for the Treasury which debts do we take, and they should be concessional ones. Currently, as my colleagues have highlighted, the BPS is indicating that we are going to borrow about 82.3% of debt next year domestically. This is going to hurt our businesses, it is going to hurt our economy, it is going to see us have a hike in the interest rates, the cost of living will go high, food prices will go high. As you've already seen, inflation has started coming up. We were at a low of 2.7% in October. Right now, as of February, we are at 3.5%. This means we will be required to dig deeper into our pockets to feed our families. This is not the way we want to go. And with the level of domestic borrowing that we are seeing, in the next year, we are going to have more challenges. Thank you.
Yes.
One of the most glaring number is the total expenditure. In the BPS, we had two different numbers. We had 4.36 trillion, and we had 4.263 trillion. The difference between these two numbers is a whopping 73 billion shillings. This was raised by the Committee on Finance in Parliament. We have also raised it in our submissions, and a proper explanation of these numbers needs to be explained. The other more scary number is the difference in the nominal GDP that is used in the same document. Where we have the macroeconomic forecast, we are using a lower nominal GDP number. But when we go to computing the deficit, we use a higher nominal GDP number. The essence of doing this is to try and show the public that our deficit is going to be small, which is now 4.3% in the BPS. But when you do the actual computation using the correct nominal GDP, the actual number is about 5 7.3%, which is in the neighborhood of 980 billion, compared to the 831 billion that is presented in the BPS. Those are very glaring numbers, and in our view, this is going to lead to a hike in taxes, because borrowing is obviously a problem, and this one is going to bring a problem to all of us. Thank you. Oh, yes. Also, domestic debt. If you look at now the domestic debt stock, we are now at 12.2 trillion. And over 52% of that is domestic debt. And that is why we are calling on government to come up with a process of retiring domestic debt, which has very high interest rates. And what we've seen, and when you read the BPS, you'll find that government itself is admitting that even economic growth has gone down from 5.6% in 2023 to 4.6% or thereabout in 2024, due to a slowdown in private sector lending as a result of outcrowding of the private sector due to this domestic borrowing. And what is shocking, we do not have a direct relationship between what we borrow domestically and the projects it funds, compared to external borrowing. External borrowing, you'll see it is related to a certain project. But what we are borrowing domestically, we don't know where this money is going. Is it going to development, or is it going to recurrent, or is it being stolen?
I know we are advocating for government to stop borrowing domestically, but government has given this as a reason to sort of, because they're now saying they're not able to access as much concessional loans, so the loans they're getting are very expensive. So they're saying they're finding themselves in a catch-22 of sorts. So if government is not able to access cheap money, then they come back to the local market. What solution are we giving? Because clearly government must borrow, right? So what does government do in this point? Because we have a deficit. So
we have a solution. Cut down on expenditure. Reduce the size of government. Why do we need all these state departments? For instance, the Ministry of Health. Why do we need 2 state departments with 2 PSs? Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Why do we need 2 state departments with 2 PSs? We can have 1. Why do we need all these ministers? The Constitution says we can survive with 14. Why do we have to have 21 or that number?
26.
There are 26.
Yeah.
And the ladies here will tell you that we are already having a problem. This is the Women's Month, and we do not have a CS gender. Yeah. We have an acting CS gender. Why do we have to have this bloated government? You will recall last year we were told that the number of advisors would be cut down. We've seen an increase in the number of advisors. Let us cut down on our expenditure, and we will not have a problem. Yes. We live within our means. Yeah.
Let us ensure that the Auditor General gives us that we have not lost any money. Imagine the findings of the Auditor General's report per sector. Travel alone, we've lost 6 billion. What would we have done with that particular 6 billion? And let's see what exactly it means for us to be working with 82% domestic borrowing. First, domestic borrowing is the bonds that they float. From there, we will not trace whether it built a dam or anything. It disappears. For the longest time, domestic treasury bills and bonds go for 15%. Foreign loans go for 2%. Whenever that happens, me, a mama mboga, me, a holder of a pay slip, I borrow at 23%. If we increase it to 82%, it therefore means governments, SACCOs, insurance companies, money market funds will not do anything else other than lend to government. We are looking at an economic collapse. Lower taxes, stop stealing. If you cannot run the government properly, step aside, let experts and people who care about Kenya run it.
I might also add, like in our presser, we said that our problem really has never been revenue per se, but expenditure, which includes budgeted and legislated corruption. Just the other day, we saw a head of state giving a gift of 20 million and promising 100 million.
Come.
So they can come.
Thank you, Jasmine. I might just reiterate from what we said earlier that our main problem is not revenue, but expenditure, which includes budgeted and legislative corruption. A case in point is a conversation that is being in the public domain, where the head of state gave a monetary gift of 20 million and promised 100 million to a church. If you look at 120 million is money that is given to another constituency as CDF. So your average Kenyan will ask, and we've seen even the Kenyans who are interested in the matter just asking, how do you just get 120 million to give to a particular institution? Some people would ask, where did it come from? Was it a proceed of quote-unquote crime? Some people also would ask, was it this money that was meant to do something? Because there is nowhere in the books of accounts where there is money, 120 million, being given to an individual church. So really the gist of our presser is that the issue is not necessarily revenue, but expenditure, where there is a lot of budgeted and legislative corruption.
Okay. So I think we close there. Thank you very much.
Tunaona, tunasikia na tutabonga. The voice.